Hey everyone, thanks for coming on out tonight. I want to definitely thank Chris and the guys at Tactical for welcoming us on up for Masterclass. Tonight Chris is just going to be doing a general Q&A for us. So Chris has been involved in professional brewing for, what, good 5 or 6 years now? Prior to that you were doing sales?
Yeah, mostly sales and stuff beforehand, but production stuff maybe like 3.5 years.
Okay, yeah, he's worked for a lot of big breweries out there, Crooked Can. You worked for, not Smoka, was it?
No,
No, yeah, Swamp Head, that's what it was. And World of Beer, and he's worked at Holland, Home Brewer Supplies, and now here.
Yeah.
So Chris is.
I get fired a lot.
Yeah. So also Chris is, if you guys didn't know, Chris is co-founder of Brewers Anonymous. He and I served together on the board of another homebrew club for a year, and we said, you know, it's time we want to try to do something different. So we came up with this concept, and here we are 3 years later. So, yeah.
Yeah, man. And on that note, I know you already made your announcement, but I don't know if you guys are all cool with it, but I want to give him a round of applause for getting you guys to where you are. Because I understand you guys did Best Florida Homebrew Club this year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so congratulations to everyone who was a part of that, because that's insane. Literally, that's one of those things, like, I remember driving around with Swamp Head, like, up in the Panhandle. I think it was in Pensacola or some shit. And I was just sitting in a World of Beer parking lot trying to sell them beer. And we were talking about trying to start a new homebrew club and, like, having that be the goal and all that kind of stuff. So, obviously, I haven't been around a lot because I've been working on this whole kind of thing. So he's really taken the helm and helped get everyone to that. So congratulations to everyone, and definitely to Steve here. So
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right, well, without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to Chris.
Yeah.
And ask him as many questions as you possibly can. Try to stump him.
If it's beer related, I might have an answer for you. Otherwise, I got nothing.
All right. So, anyways, thank you, and take it away, man.
Yeah. So I've done a few presentations for Brewers Anonymous before. Usually, I've got something that I'll talk about specifically, whether it be like dry hopping or additives or water or all that kind of stuff. Tonight we were talking, and it just seems like with Brewers Anonymous, there's such a varied mix of people at different skill levels and people kind of gravitating towards certain things within home brewing or brewing in general, that we just kind of open up the table to just about anything really. So yeah, I guess a quick backstory on us, if you don't already know. My partner Doug and I started this place. We just had our 1-year anniversary on the 11th, and it's been insane. We spent about a year or so building the place out. Did a lot of the stuff ourselves. Right now we operate a 6-barrel system, so it's 2 single 3-barrel vessels, right? So they each make roughly 100 or about, we can squeeze about 110 gallons out of each of them. So we'll typically do a triple batch brew in a day. Makes for a pretty long day. I'm sorry, I'll stay in one spot. Sorry. All right. That's why I told you we gotta hire a cameraman. So we'll typically max it out. So instead of getting 9 barrels in a day, we'll try to get about 10 barrels. We've got 5 10-barrel uni tanks and then 1 10-barrel bright tank. So typically what we'll try to do, if it's anything that we try to get really clear, like our lager or the blood stripe or anything like that, we'll transfer it over, make sure it has time to settle out and stuff. If it's something that, you know, clarity isn't that big of a deal, whether it be a hazy or the hefe or things like that, we might just kind of rack it in the uni, just kind of bust it out in there, so it's not another step to where we can worry about oxygen intake and all that kind of stuff too. Right now we've got about 4 or 5 cores. We didn't open thinking we would have core brands, but obviously, you know, you're kind of an idiot if you don't pay attention to the numbers. So the ones that sold the most, we followed those and they keep doing it. So we make lager all the time, we make hefe all the time. We've always got some sort of white stout on. We've always got hazy IPA and now standard IPA as well. And then kind of gives us some wiggle room to play around with whatever we want to do, but you know, it's pretty much just kind of feeding the beast and whatever it wants at this point. So, but yeah, I guess open up the floor, man. If you guys have any questions about what you were working on, about what we're doing, anything in general, shoot. What's up?
So with the aspect of that, since you got 5 cores, obviously you want to constantly keep trying to do different recipes. Is it straight out the batch that you guys are going to here, or?
Yeah, so And I apologize in advance for either being very long-winded or for not talking about something enough. I'll typically probably go into way too much detail.
It's never a problem.
Cool.
I don't know if anyone else.
So one of the first things that Steve and I talked about in this presentation was doing a presentation on quantifying your brew system. And from what I talked to Steve about, I guess Bobby over Bowiggins, if you had been over to that class too, when he talked about recipe formulation is really just understanding your equipment and what it's capable of. I'm sure a couple of you at this point have probably had, more than one iteration of your system at home. You may have started with something smaller, gone bigger, maybe moved back, or you've got your dream set on something that you think is going to be the end-all be-all of whatever it is. And at the end of the day, it's whatever works best for you, but you also have to understand that no matter what you build, it will have its limitations, and you do need to understand its parameters. Things like boil-off rates, things like transfer times, things like basically just maxing out certain aspects of things. There's a lot of things that we would love to be able to do that with a system like this. It's a lot more difficult. So with that being said, what's the initial question? I'm so sorry.
The aspect that you're want to try a new recipe
Right.
or something to that.
So with that being said, we did a lot of water tests. Just like any other brewery out there, we had ideas of what our first beers we wanted to be, but they turn a little bit. You kind of have to play around with the system a little bit. But once you get it dialed in, you kind of know your parameters, right?
Okay.
So whether you use an Excel sheet or a recipe or Beersmith or whatever it may be, you kind of start tailoring in things. And I really can't stress enough, know your system. Like, take time to learn every facet, your boil-off rates, your dead space, all these different things, because just because you go out and you find a recipe or you make something on Beersmith, raise your hand if every single time you brewed a recipe that you got from Beersmith or online, it came out exactly the way it said it was supposed to on there. It doesn't happen. But that's because they're not writing that recipe for your equipment. They're writing the recipe for theirs, and it's a good guideline. So but once you know all these different parameters and you can build a kind of portfolio on it, then you can basically just throw anything you want to at it, have a pretty good idea, right? So to kind of give you an example on that, a couple of things that we ran into with, say, going from a homebrew scale all the way up to this aspect of things was, on the homebrew scale, you can usually chill your wort a lot faster, right? So you can go from that 210 all the way down to, say, if you're doing a hop stand at 170, you can get it down pretty quick, and you let it sit there and whatever. Or you can bring it all the way down to pitching temps within 20, 30 minutes if you're using some sort of chiller, like recirc or something like that. This takes, I think we do, when we cut off, we still do a 10 to 15 minute whirlpool, we still do a 10 to 15 minute rest. After that, then we do our transfer, which is about, I want to say it's 10 gallons every 4 minutes, 23 seconds.
Oh, wow.
So it takes a while. So, while you're figuring out your late hop additions, where you might do, I don't know, say 2 or 3 ounces on a homebrew scale and expect X amount of IBUs, it doesn't necessarily linearly proportion in here. So you might have to scale back or add them in at separate times and take all that into your process. That's what this system does, and there's no way around it. You know what I mean? Physics is physics. So back on the original question, at this point, we've actually never really trial ran any of the beers unless we had already done them at beer fest beforehand. Once we built the first recipe we did to be kind of a measurement as far as where the efficiencies were, what we can expect on times and things like that. So that way we took that same information and we relayed it onto other recipes and just started recipe by recipe tailoring things down and tailoring them in. So now we know, we may not hit our gravity dead on at 1059, but we know batch 1 will be 1057, batch 1 will be 1061, and then the other one will be 1058. So it'll be within that window. And I think another thing too is, and I'm not going to speak on anyone else's mindset on it. I know when I first started brewing, I was very dedicated to this beer needs to turn out the way I want it to turn out. And I think at a certain point too, I think the bigger you get, you need to start realizing that it's going to do its own thing. Just because it's not exactly what you expected doesn't mean it's not a great product, and doesn't mean that it's not going to do well just because it didn't turn out the exact same way. Like 1059 versus 1056, no one's going to taste it. But what's up?
I have a follow-up question then to Luis's. Do you ever bust out the RoboBrew and
Yeah.
go back and just do trial runs to play with stuff?
So trial runs, no. I still wish I had time. Like, I actually have a dream of like having a Sunday off and brewing a beer in my garage. Like, that sounds awesome. Like, I'm assuming it's the same way a chef that works like 70 hours a week goes home and be like, man, I really want to make that steak and spaghetti on Sunday too. But we busted out for like things for events and stuff where, you know, we don't want to make a large volume of stuff. And we might, because he's also, so I've got a Robo Brew, he's got a grandfather, so we can typically yield about 10 to 15 gallons of stuff out of something. So if we ever need to make like a half barrel for a festival, then we can do that. It allows us a lot of fun too. Austin, our taproom manager, if you haven't met him, also a really, really great brewer. I think one of my favorite things about having the team that we have here now is we all have very different perspectives as far as what we expect out of brewing. So Doug has a really cool, just kind of fun approach to things, and you know, knows what he likes and knows what it's going for, and does a really good job at that. I'm probably far way too analytical on things that don't matter. And he has no emotion whatsoever to it. So he's going to make the best Vienna lager because he's going to read all the books that do it, and it's just going to happen because it's not romantic to him.
It's science.
Yeah, exactly. So with that being said, I mean, he'll make some stuff for us from time to time. So whenever we have a festival coming up, or if we're doing an event, or one thing that we really try to do here is if a staff member has an idea, go brew it. Like, we'll reimburse you. Like, go brew it, and if it's good, we'll throw it on, and we'll tell everyone it was your idea and that you made it and all that stuff. Some people don't care as much, and that's fine. Like, you can't expect every staff member that comes on to be like, I want to be the next big brewer. But, you know, Austin will come up all the time, and he'll shoot ideas at us, and some of them are great, and some of them may not work. So we've had a lot of stuff from him on, too, so that's kind of how we utilize that whole aspect of things. So, does that answer that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you do brew in a bag? Is that what that's?
Yeah, essentially. So,
Yeah.
essentially what these are is inside here, and there's basically, you can see this kind of like hoist mechanism right here. This is a big giant basket. So think of it as like a big giant brew bag. The bottom is perforated. So what we'll do when we start out, you know, we'll hit it with our strike water. We'll hit it with our salts and our acids and whatever to lock in our mash pH and kind of whatever water content we want. Sorry about the water, by the way, or functional area. So, what's that? We use city water. Yep. I am staunchly against RO water. Not to get too opinionated, but yeah. But yeah. So just real quick, we use city water. We run it through a carbon filter. Now that's not to say that's going to work everywhere. With Central Florida, we are pretty lucky with the fact that our water is not terribly hard. It's a little high in calcium, but that's something you can kind of navigate around. I never really fully understood the idea of doing RO for the sake of stripping all minerality just to add it back again. And then also have a shit ton of wastewater. To me, it just doesn't sound good. I know a lot of people swear by it. They think having the blank canvas makes them even more of an artist. And blah, blah, blah.
Publix does a lot of wastewater than our.
Yeah. So, no, and even then, like, distilled water still works great on the hunger scale and stuff like that. I used to buy that all the time. So, yeah, we'll run a water sample from time to time just to make sure it's staying within the parameters. But yeah, so we'll hit it with strike water. We'll dough in. We'll use the pretty little mash paddle over there just to kind of get things going. It is behind you. I'm sorry. I'm not. Yeah. It's very sturdy. By the way, if you ever need a giant mash paddle, this thing's awesome. We've only broken one so far. It's because Muscles Doug over there broke it in the middle of the masher. Yeah, right? So yeah, we'll typically, so what this system does specifically, are you guys pretty familiar with the standard steam, like mash ladder ton setup and stuff like that from normal breweries and stuff? I don't need to explain that anyway. If I do, please raise your hand. Cool. So this system.
I'll ask later. I don't want to sidetrack.
No, it's all good. You've already learned how, yeah. So I'll be the whole different conversation here in 30 seconds.
That's create your heat with steam?
What's that?
You create your heat with steam?
No, so this is actually, typical systems are steam jacketed.
Yeah.
This one's actually an electrical element. So this guy right here has two, I think it's 5,000 watt elements going in. They're about 3 feet long. They're juggernauts, man. They'll do the work. That's another thing too, is learning your system. So if on steam systems that I've worked on before, usually a pretty quick, rapid kind of, mash to boil temperature. this guy's a little bit slower. So you need to understand that. You need to learn that, the fact that like you can't force that thing to get any more powerful. It's only going to be able to draw what it can draw. So our typical, you know, once we finish our sparge and we cover it up and stuff like that, it might be 45 minutes until we're at boiling temperatures. But that's just what it does. But at the same time, you can lock that in. So like with steam, you can do the same thing too. But you know, we could just basically set a PID on here at whatever percentage that we want and just have it roll with that. Which is kind of cool too, because if we're doing a Pilsner, we can do a harder boil, kind of get off some of that DMS precursor stuff. Some of the other ones, we can get away with doing a shorter boil, kind of a lower PID, kind of saving a little bit on energy, just because we don't really need to worry about boiling the hell out of it. So,
Do you do a lot of step mashing with that system?
we only step mash. We only really do a step infusion with our Hefeweizen, just because I like doing it. Anybody out there do step mashes pretty frequently and see a big difference on stuff?
Not with propane.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely not doing that unless you want burnt grain everywhere. Okay,
But I haven't tasted the beer yet, so.
gotcha. So let us know.
It's been in a barrel for enough, so.
This is where I'm going to get, this is only my opinion. This is not in books or anything like that. You hear a lot about decoction, step infusion, all that, and the step infusion does actually work out for separate like beta amylase, alpha amylase, those kind of things. But when you get into decoction and stuff like that, I've had beers that are decocted and done traditional ways, and they're super amazing. And I've had beers that are done single infusion, single rest, and they're super amazing. And I've never been able to really tell the difference until I was told otherwise. I don't know, unless you guys, you know what I mean? I do it on the Hefe just because of the heavy protein aspect of things. I like to have a little bit of that alpha amylase aspect of things, and it does kind of help shoot us towards mash out temperatures later. But that's just the only one we really do. So,
How long is your average boil? There was a Zymergy article maybe 2, 3, 4 months ago that said the half-life of DMS is like half an hour. So anything over half an hour is really, you're not doing anything additional for DMS.
So DMS formulation is a weird one. It volatilizes off pretty quickly. So as long as you're rolling, it doesn't want to be in there. You do. All right. So on boil times, we'll do 60 minutes for some traditional styles. There are some styles where we go super low, like our sours. I might only do 10 minutes. But a pretty vigorous boil, just because I want to make sure it's got a little bit of Pilsner in there. I want to blow off that DMS precursor, those kind of things. Some of them we only do 30 minutes. Actually, a good amount of them. Just because if we're turning and burning 3 batches in a day, and no one can really tell the difference. Yeah, I mean, and here's the thing though too. The one thing that I've definitely found on this side of things, especially coming, and Steve, you can attest to this, man. Like coming from, you know, making shitty beer on a stove to trying to build a big system in the garage to trying to do this, like you will read so many things that people believe wholeheartedly, but have never wondered why. You know what I mean? And that's one of those things to where, like, if you get the precursor out, if you get a good rolling boil, you shouldn't have a problem. The way the malts are modified these days, there shouldn't be an issue with those kind of things, unless you're using like floor malted or 6-row or those kind of aspect of things. So,
So you should worry about
what's up?
So with floor malt and
That's a difficult question to answer because every floor maltster does it differently. But they typically have less control over their moisture and their oxygen content on it.
60 minutes.
Oh yeah, 60 minutes is fine. I'm not saying that you're going to have a problem. It's just like if you are starting to do those shorter times, I'd probably make sure you've got a very vigorous boil if you are doing the shorter times on something like that. Pilsner, obviously, we all know, kind of is a little bit less modified, so you do have a little bit more of that precursor to it. Now, fun thing about DMS, does everyone know that once the boil's done, you still have a huge problem with it? Yeah? So if you don't know, don't worry about pointing yourself out. The precursor for DMS is actually, it's within the malt, and it will present itself inside the mash, right? So DMS itself, once that precursor is converted over to DMS, that will volatilize off in the boil. Now the reason why people stress very quick chill times, and we're not talking, you don't have to get it cold within 30 minutes, but if you're going longer than 2 hours to get your stuff cold, then you might start running into an issue. Whatever DMS that you had before the boil is boiled out, but that precursor is still there. So you can get within that target window range of the temperature range, which I once heard is about 110 to 160. If you're in that within a pretty good amount of time, you will start to redevelop DMS inside of your product. So
usually getting 100.
yeah,
After that, it's forever.
that's fine. In which case, you're probably pretty good. That window needs to be within a certain time frame. And then also too, this isn't something I know a lot about. It's just something I've heard kind of in passing. The precursor can also be absorbed by a few lager yeasts, which can then lead to a very corny flavor as well. So if you're ever like experimenting with a new lager yeast that you're not familiar with, maybe do some research out there, see what other people's opinions are. Because if you start seeing a lot of people hitting on cream corn or asparagus or canned tomato and saying they have DMS issues, it may not be their process. It might be that yeast specifically kind of reabsorbs and shoots out DMS. So. Yes, sir.
I noticed you got some kegs piled up around here and no names on them. Do you rent those kegs? Or
No, we actually have them all. They're all tatted up. They got all the tactical brewing on them. Yeah. Yeah, I apologize for the pile up. I've been gone for 2 weeks, so it turns out that that's what we sell in 2 weeks, which is kind of cool. Yeah. Yes, sir. I think it depends on the person. Somebody else probably could have done it far faster than I did. But at the same time, if you're not paying attention to certain variables, it might take you a little bit longer. My biggest thing was, so with home brewing, I don't know about anybody else out here, but I know that personally, I used to experiment with new techniques and new process and new all the time because I was always trying to learn something new about it, right? But one thing I wish I would have done sooner is just do the same thing, like repeat over and over and over again and manipulate the recipe to your process, right? So here, we only brew 3 different ways. We do one thing for sours, we do one thing for sugar adjuncts, like anything like Belgians that we might add sugar in, or say we're doing like corn sugar in a double IPA or something like that. Yes, we do use corn sugar. Surprise, a lot of people do. And then all the other ones are pretty standard. My biggest thing was know your times, right? So since we are doing 3 a day, right, I want to know exactly how long that mash is. How long does it take us to mash it on average? So 10 to 15 minutes there. How long does it take us to do our usual mash? About 50 minutes. Maybe sometimes a little bit longer depending on the grain bill, but usually about 50. How long does it take for sparge? Pretty usually cut it into how many gallons per minute and how long that's going to take. How long does it take to get from that 168 mash out all the way to boil? Like making sure that's dialed in. So that way you've got all these little time blocks to where at the end of it you can be like, cool, sparge is done, let's start this, because then we don't have to worry about overlapping water usage and this, that, or whatever, right? Understanding and basically just timing out every single process. If you do that, then no matter what, nothing should change, right? Like fluid dynamics and physics only work really one way. So if it takes X amount of time for it to transfer, it might be a little off depending on the viscosity of your wort, high gravity, low gravity, those kind of things. But it shouldn't change, right? So working your recipe around those variables. I could sit there and be like, yeah, I want to do like a 180 hop stand, and I do one 165 hop stand, and then I'm gonna blast it out. It doesn't really do that well, because I know that if I try to do like this 200 degrees down to 165, this might be 165 because the way the whirlpool is, but this is still 190. So I'm still isomerizing all my hops up here. So that's just not an option for me. So we just manipulate our recipe for dry hop conditions and stuff. So just kind of like again, on that same note, again, my answer would be very specific to this, but understanding what your capabilities of your system are and not necessarily getting frustrated with what it's not capable of doing, but maybe just getting a little bit more creative with how to manipulate around those things. Is that okay? Okay, cool.
You're going to be matching with the regular max ton of this switches in a real bag. Realize that your efficiencies are going to change. You're going to have to adjust your recipes.
Oh, for sure. And not only that too, like one big thing I'm sure many of you have already noticed, your efficiency based on your gravity of your target wort changes drastically, and it's not necessarily on a linear scale.
So,
like we can, what's up?
which gives you more efficiency? High gravity or low gravity?
Definitely low gravity. Yeah. Oh yeah, man. I can hit pretty solid efficiency, pretty reliably with things like lager and hefe and anything under like 6% ABV. The moment we get above 7, Jesus, dude, it incrementally goes like, I can almost, sometimes I've been down to like 68, and it's, oh man, it's brutal. But at the same time, same thing as the homebrew scale, I'm not making 30 to 100 barrels of beer. So the difference of efficiency loss versus being able to get the product out of it, maybe 15, 20 bucks in grain. So.
Now, would you say that your water to grain ratio has a lot to do with that efficiency loss that you're getting there, because you're obviously throwing in a lot more grain in the same volume of water?
Again, knowing the system.
Yeah.
This system specifically, yes. I mean, we've had to do things like reiterated mashing and tailoring the water ratios to certain styles to kind of make up on the back end. It really just is kind of a learning curve, and once you see what works, kind of following that and understanding why. Right. I know that's kind of a vague answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's a good answer. That's perfect.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's and that might be your system. Yeah, because I know, like, so with ours, to maintain the same heat, it basically recirculates. It's almost like a rim system kind of thing. Like it'll throughout the entire mash, it'll keep recirculating. So every 10-15 minutes, we'll cut it, we'll stir it, and then we'll start the recirc again with the heating element on. It'll cut the heating element on whenever it actually hits below temp. So it constantly keeps the wort itself at a specific temperature. That being said, sales and marketing sound awesome. That idea sounds awesome. But you cannot tell me that going through this tube and going into the top that's open to open air is the exact same temperature as down here. So that's just something this system does as far as a pitfall goes. You know what I mean?
Stir your kettle while you're cooling it. Watch the temperatures change.
Oh yeah, yeah. Do yourself a favor. If you've never done it and you think your mash is like uniform temp, just take a temperature probe and start poking around. It's terrifying. Yeah.
I think I was really showing
Mm-hmm.
I know you don't have a cool ship here, but I know you homebrewed before, and you got wild beast to kick or start in some of your at your house. How long did that take? 5 days to get that wild beast to kick to go, or I mean,
As far as like,
what temperature and how long did it take for the wort to actually get?
because I think we talked about this a while back, like how
Yeah, a couple years ago.
propagated some yeast from the backyard. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a total accident. I'll be completely honest, right? That was born out of a very lazy mistake that I did. That kind of got my sparks flying a little bit. Where one night I was brewing, I think it was a smoked porter, and I was at the time I didn't have a chill coil or anything like that. I was using an ice bath and a spoon and like a 7-gallon kettle or whatever, and I'd dump it in there and I'd stir it around, and try to get all shit. And it was like 3 in the morning because like I had to start it after work and blah blah blah. So I ended up getting a little bit of the wort into the ice bath, and I cleaned all that up, and like I just forgot about the water in the ice bath. And then the next morning I came out and I was double checking to make sure everything was good. And then since my garage is a detached garage, it's open to the elements. It is what it is. It was bubbling. And I was like, oh,
How long did it take?
that was like the next morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So yeah, 5-6 hours maybe. So it was one of those kind of like, so I didn't mean to, but I did. So I immediately sanitized the shit out of that thing. Hey Doug, this is Doug, by the way.
Hi, Doug.
He's the other guy responsible for everything.
So when are you going to do a beard beer?
I'm never doing that. It's disgusting. But to give you an idea on that, the one time I did do it, I kind of approached it the same way as like kettle sour. So have you done those?
I haven't really kettle sour.
Okay. So one of the big things that you typically want to do with the wort, you obviously have that souring phase before the boil. But one of the big things that they kind of suggest is purging it with CO2, and then trying to drop your pH down to 4.5 with like lactic acid to give whatever you're doing a head start. Because at 4.5, it's usually too low for things like Clostridium or Enterobacter, or some of those more gnarly like food spoilage bacteria to start building colonies. So it really gives lacto kind of a little bit of push to kind of take over, right? So I did that same thing. So I took like it was 2 or 3 1-gallon wort containers at like 10:30, dropped the pH to 4.5, and then just put cheesecloth over the top of the growler and just put it out there. And then yeah, they were bubbling away in about 24 hours, and then I basically just put airlocks on them and watched what happened. So I never tried anything because I was too freaked out to try it because I didn't know what was in there. I never used it for anything because I didn't want to ruin all my equipment at the time because I didn't know what else was in there. But they smelled great. It was fun. One smelled like pineapple-y, mango-y, and then the other one just smelled like straight apple cider kind of thing. So it was cool.
Did the possums have anything to do with that process?
No, possums can go eat something because like these guys are terrifying. Luckily, I haven't had that problem since.
That's good.
But For those of you who don't know, I had a brew night where I shared my garage with a possum. I was brewing something, I think, for actually one of our events when we first started. And I walked out, and again, it's this detached garage. It's not my house, or else I would make sure this wouldn't happen, but it's like falling apart. It's disgusting. But I guess the possum had gotten in, and I opened the door, and it's just sitting there, it hisses at me. That was terrifying, so I jumped back, and it runs underneath the fridge. It was like, it's like trying to get it out, and it's mad at me. I was like, I gotta keep going. So I went to go check after about 30 minutes. It's gone. And so probably about every hour I'd be going to do something, I'd just hear, I was like, Jesus, and just kept moving around. Until finally I like scurried it out by the end of the night.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Non-possum related?
So noticing a lot of people are putting lactose into their sours.
Sure.
Why do you choose to do that, and you see that those beers perform better than their non-lactose friends?
So right off the bat, I can tell you lactose is one of those weird ingredients where you have a small percentage of, I think, the beer demographic that finds it kind of like a hype thing, where they see that in there and they think, ooh, like immediately clicks on a light bulb, right? We also see a lot of people who won't drink it because it's got lactose in it, and they're just either intolerant or it's not something they want to ingest or whatever. But from our perspective, sours are very, very subjective. We don't really, I mean, other than like the titratable acids or whatever you want to talk about as far as quantifying the acid content, we don't really have a way to quantify a measurement of sourness. It's almost kind of like the same way IPAs were back in like the early 2000s, where somebody who's been drinking Sierra Nevada can try a Stone Ruination and be like, nah, it's not that bad. But the person who's only been drinking Bud Light spits it out and thinks they're blind. Like, it's that same kind of thing. So there's really no uniform measurement of like what sour is, right? So, and then on that same vein, you have some people who love sours and they want it to taste like battery acid. The more sour, the better, man. It's like, oh man, I want to eat Tums later. But then that, like, on the other end, the other people are drinking some that, as far as the pH scale goes, it's sour. It certainly is sour, but they're like, it's not sour. You know what I mean? So with our process, we know about where the pH is going to fall. We know the fruit itself is going to drop the pH a little bit, and those kind of things. So lactose is kind of one of those like little backhanded things to where if we didn't have lactose in that, it would taste like it's burning because the pH is actually really low. But with lactose, it's more of a sensory perception thing. So I guess the best way I can kind of equate it to, everyone's had a double IPA, right? Everyone's had a single IPA, right? Which one tastes hoppier? Some say single, some say double, right? So if you were to try just like a more dry version of an IPA with all that stuff, there's nothing to combat the hop character. So the hops actually present themselves a lot more. Whereas like a double IPA, it might have a lot more body to it. It might have a lot more sweetness to it, maybe some viscosity. And the IBU count is higher. But because that sweetness is there, it's not perceived as hoppier. Does that make sense? So it's almost that same kind of logic with that aspect of things, where the sweetness is there and the pH is there, but at the same time it doesn't taste as sour as it actually is. So
it's just to make the sour more palatable.
Yeah, sure. Just like, in our opinion, it rounds it out. So, and we don't do it on every single one. It's just a matter of we'll research.
Beer is a very common thing that people are.
So on that realm too, I don't want to say it too much, but I think another thing is I think a lot of people are gravitating towards just sweet beer and juice in general. And lactose is sweet, so it's easy to go.
Pastry stouts.
Yeah. So, which we make them too, so I can't really sit there and talk shit.
No,
but
that's not your core beer in essence.
yeah, we have to make them though. You know what I mean? Like we still we make them and we enjoy making them because it's a fun challenge.
Yeah.
Something I'm gonna drink all the time.
Have you ever run out of product?
Yeah. We do our best not to. I mean, when we started with like 5 beers. Was it 4 or 5? 5? Yeah. Sorry, you can chime in too if you were there. But,
I don't know, but
we started with 5. Slowly, we graduated up a little bit, and just kind of, we didn't really know a way to do it. A lot of it's just kind of, at first was reactionary, but we built a pretty cool program to where, we watch rate of sale. We know how many halves are going out every weekend. We know about how many halves we're selling a day of each brand. So we can kind of forecast about how much time on each line we have left of inventory.
before you have to brew it
Yeah, so we know, all right, so we've got a dark beer coming up. Our dark beer takes 3.5 weeks. Inventory shows we've got 6, so I don't have to worry about brewing a dark beer for another 2 weeks. So once it starts coming up, you just make sure you got a tank space open, plug it in. Usually it's good. But at the same time, you got a lot of things like events. Like our anniversary weekend, we ended up selling twice as much product as we ever have over a weekend. Like it flew up. Which obviously a hit on inventory. So now we're kind of scrambling around and trying to speed up and play with that kind of thing too. So as much as you want to like sit there and quantify every little bit of it, there are these outside circumstances. But usually, I mean, we're up to 13 lines now. We might be down a line or two every now and then. But our biggest thing is instead of, we're only open 4 days a week. Instead of opening like another day or another day for longer, why not like make sure we have all the product? Like it doesn't make sense to sit there and open and sell more when we can't keep backing it up. You guys come here to try beer, right? So it's no fun when you go to a brewery and half their lines are empty, right? That sucks. But when you go there and they've got 12 or 16 awesome things on draft, there you go. So,
Are you doing a Christmas type beer?
yeah, we're actually we're brewing a winter lager on Monday. What's that?
What's in that?
So honestly, like he and I were talking, it doesn't really exist. It's no spices. Just kind of like one of those things where like what is. We started with this rotational lager idea. Fest was a lot of fun to do, but what's the winter lager? What does winter remind you of? What do you expect out of something that you're drinking in winter in Florida? So we kind of built it around that kind of thing. So some untraditional lager ingredients for sure. I think we got like some Weyermann chocolate rye. We're using English hops instead of like Saaz or Noble stuff or anything. But just that's also one of those fun things too, to where like I don't know about you, but 3 to 4 years ago when we were opening the place and I was like, let's make a lager. That wasn't exciting, but now that's our market. That's what our clientele is looking for, things like that. So when we sit down, we can start geeking out and be like, all right, so we're making this lager. How do we have fun with this?
And it's feed too, it's hard beer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, like when you're doing a lager, I mean, you can't mess that up. So everyone will taste when you mess that up. But so I don't know. So that'll be fun. That'll be our Christmas kind of stuff. We've got a coffee Irish dry stout coming out soon too. So yeah, maybe that one.
Obviously, I have a number of regulars.
Yeah.
What do you see more of? People that have their core beer that they want to drink all the time, or people that want to try the new stuff? Or is it a mix?
I'd say like 30-70.
Dirty hell.
30% people.
Come on up, man. Don't be weird. Actually, you want to answer that question? I'm gonna go get another beer.
30% come in and they get from your core beers.
Yeah, we have
70% try the new beers.
Yeah, we have an unusual situation here too that we kind of realized from the get-go. We get a lot of people that live above us.
Right.
We've corrupted a lot of them over this past year.
That's a good one.
So when we first opened up, it was Kevin, for instance. I want something like Miller Lite or something like a Bud Light, and we got him on base lager. And now he'll actually, after all these months, will actually like sip on IPA every once in a while. Yeah, we'll get him on like a hazy IPA. He'll go back to lager.
Yeah.
But slowly but surely, we're noticing the big difference with everybody. So we get a lot of people from. We're so far from the airport and the tourist destinations, but we actually get a lot of people from all over the nation that come over here, and I'd say 30% of the people know what they want. They'll just keep drinking that. And a lot of that is the people that live in this area. But besides that, it's people like to see us come out with new beers every weekend, and we like to do it too. You don't want to go back and like 6 months later you already know the whole tap list. No, I want you to come back and more than
See what's new.
yeah, I want more than 4/5 of the tap list should be new because it's that's like our number one seller. Definitely base lager tied with any hazy IPA that we throw on. Those are the yeah.
And then when I started brewing, I was always brewing IPAs. And now I'm surprising myself. I'm doing that.
Yeah, and Hefty's one of
Hefty's
our
actually like
cores,
number 2,
too.
number 3.
Yeah.
Well, I've never brewed a lager that's coming up on Thanksgiving weekend.
So I don't know if he touched on this, and it's one thing that we kind of approached too, just from looking at sales and stuff like that. Like, I meet a lot of people who are, or breweries too, who are very specific with how they brew things. Like they do a style, and they do it great, right? That's what they think is going to like pay the bills and stuff. I think a lot of times people forget that they're not pandering to beer nerds. They're opening a bar essentially, and they're making their own product. So for every person out there who's going to ask you what your Whirlpool time and how much Simcoe you used, there's going to be like 20 new people walking in who literally have only really tried Amber Bock or Bud Light. Like that's kind of the ones you also have to appease as well. You're running a business at that point, if that makes sense. So,
Which is awesome because you're used to people, like you can corrupt them, like I said earlier. Someone's used to drinking a Blue Moon, come here and have Feffy Heffy, and they like it better. So next thing you know, it's like next time they drink that Blue Moon, it's not as fulfilling.
Coming out of tax.
Yeah. It is.
When you guys were planning your system here, did you always envision the brewing the basket system, and were you brewing the bag brewers with your home brewers, or how did
So-
that come about?
This system specifically, it's one of those like, it's not because it was something we were more familiar with. It's because it saved us a lot of capital by going with it.
Having
Where-
a separate nice ton and a separate water ton is a lot more expensive.
We're about to pull the trigger on an actual, like, more updated kind of steam jacketed 2-vessel system, those kind of things too. But you know, when you're like, it was one of those things where I think we both felt very confident. Like, if it works, we'll be able to, like, it's a lot more manual, it's a lot more labor intensive, but we weren't afraid about putting the labor into it, and kind of busting our ass and getting as much out of it as we could until we could get to the point to where we weren't sweating about getting a new system and having to worry about taking out all these massive loans that we were concerned about paying back or anything too. So,
I'll say too, most of you guys, you're all familiar with Rockford and the Rockford brewing system.
Yeah.
This is a different version of the same system.
yeah, they've got a 5-barrel version of this, single vessel. This is just 2 single 3-barrel vessels.
So in the aspect that you mentioned, as far as like the first your anniversary, that you ran out of beer, or not ran out of beer, that blew out of a lot of the stock. How do you guys manage in the aspect as far as it's in homebrew scale? We can buy the malts, we can buy the hops, we can buy yeast, no problem. But on a pro brewer scale, I think Jerry had mentioned that you guys have to have contracts with, or I'm guessing, or is that not the same?
It is. It is for certain breweries. When you're I'll put it this way. So, like, if you're of a certain size and you do a lot of distribution, you have a very specific core lineup that takes very specific hops. Usually, it's a hop kind of contract.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it's
no
not the
degree.
same
Yeah.
as like malts or yeast or.
No, malts and yeast are typically pretty. Some of them have higher lead times depending on the volume you need.
Okay.
But I mean, it's one of those things when you work with your distributors, you start to find out pretty quickly. So, you know, some, like, say if you're doing 30-barrel batches or 45-barrel batches, you know you need to order your yeast like 2 weeks in advance. So, because they need to prop it, they need to send it out to those kind of things. When it comes to hops specifically, though, like at that point, you're really working with your sales and your marketing team. You're working with your distributors. Like, say you've got a core IPA, a core Hefe, and those kind of things. You're like, all right, well, we're expecting to sell X amount. So maybe we go 10% higher than X amount. So that way we know we're locked in. Say we use a very like high commodity one like Mosaic or Citra or something like that. You pretty much have to write in the contract for something like that. We are in a very fortunate scale to where we don't really have, like the cores that we do have don't typically use these crazy ultra sought after. Like that's one thing we actually, whenever we start doing recipe development stuff, we try to, unless it's something we know is going to be a one-time thing, we try to factor that in. So when we're writing an IPA recipe, we're not going to be like, oh, let's get Galaxy and Nelson Sauvin and blah, man, and all the Citra, because we don't really pull contracts and we don't want to make that beer like every other week. So, you know, like it kind of, I find it fun. I don't know if you find it fun where we'll check spot hops or certain like hop distributors and stuff. And you're like, all right, what's laying around here? Like almost like doing like a bargain bin kind of thing. Yeah.
Got this on the side.
But it's been really cool too because it's lent itself to a lot of fun things like doing an experimental hop series that we probably never would have done if it hadn't been for the fact of like, all right, well we need to find a cool hop. Let's roll with this and see what happens. Or we just did one with it was a BSG New Zealand hop blend. Project X-Ray is coming out next week, and it's all New Zealand hop blend 107 from BSG. It's basically just something they kind of tailored specifically, and it's just the one hop. Same thing with Samba. We did the same thing with 06267. Yeah, something like that. But all these different things to where like just take advantage of whatever you can find at the time. Like Ghost Blimp out there has hella Galaxy, Big Secret, and all that kind of stuff too, to where we just happened to find those that day and it worked out. You know what I mean? So whereas like lager, we know the hops we like, we can get that all the time. Hefe, we know the hops we like, we get that all the time.
So, okay, because of your system setup, you haven't run into an issue where you need to make a beer to appease or at least to fill the taps, but you don't have enough product to push into it.
No, it's never been from a resource standpoint, if that's what you're asking. And luckily with our format, we are very lucky because we are smaller and we can kind of pivot whenever we need to. So yeah, that kind of answers that.
No, it does.
Yeah.
Smaller compared to Crooked Can, you mean? Or
What's up?
smaller compared to Crooked Can?
Oh yeah, we're far smaller.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So, compared to a home brewer, you're not smaller. Do you have issues when hops run out at the end of the season?
No, because we really don't have a lot of recipes that rely on certain hops.
I tried to get Citra from Jeremy a couple weeks ago. It says, if I can get it for you, I'll get it for you.
Yeah, it's a tough
But this, the season is over. Citra's a high demand.
So one thing too that's really helped us out is we're a huge proponent of networking and getting to know our fellow brewers in the area too. And it's not something it's really that. I mean, like, it's not something we go out of our way to be like, oh man, what if they got it? It's more of like we've gotten along really well with these breweries, and from time to time, like whenever they need help, we help them out. Or we can sit there and reach out and be like, hey man, I'm writing an IPA recipe. Do you have anything that you're over on? Because you might actually be helping them out to get rid of their stuff.
It's not too bad of a deal because I couldn't get one of the hops from Jeremy and switch to Mandarin and Bavaria, and now I can get that silver.
So there you go. That's the thing though too. Is like it might force you to be a little bit more experimental and more understanding too.
Now I have an IPA with it.
There you go.
I like it.
I actually had a question too. Right?
How do you guys wood age?
So it depends. We're gonna start barrel aging pretty soon. I wanted to do it sooner, but we haven't actually had the inventory to be able to set aside for it. So if we were to make 10 barrels, we know 10 barrels is going to sell almost faster than we can remake 10 barrels of that same line. So it doesn't make sense to take 4 barrels worth, put it in actual wooden barrels, and then run out of product and have no line. We're getting to the point now to where we can kind of get to that point. So barrel aging is one thing, and that's a whole different conversation. I know you guys have kind of already done a master class, I think, with Charles, right?
Yeah.
They do a great job over there with that. So usually whenever we do it here, it just depends on the wood and the beer itself. So there's a couple different ways you can go about it. Right.
Just a cool insight on that part of barrel aging. I don't know if you want to do like bourbon barrel aged, but I went to St. Augustine. St. Augustine has really good bourbon distillery.
Oh yeah, man, I love their stuff.
They sell those barrels for like $250.
That's not bad. I love their stuff, man. I met the owner once. He's a really
It'd be a good way to introduce a bourbon into like stout or porter or something like that.
No, for sure, man. I appreciate the heads up. We've actually got a pretty good contact from a distillery in Canada. Yeah. Down in St. Pete that we're going to be working with too. But I love St. Augustine. I love their products, so I might go just kind of take an exploratory trip up there soon. But yeah,
Company research.
Yeah. But yeah, so for the wood aging stuff that we've been doing so far, it really just depends. So it depends on the wood variety. Like we did the wood aged triple. So we ended up doing like honeycomb kind of things that we found from a company. We've done spiles before. I think it really depends too on how quickly you need it, how much time you have. Like for our Scotch ale we did, we ordered a little bit more than the average recommended, but also we needed it a little bit faster than what they said the turnaround time was. So it was one of those like, all right, well, if 1 + 1 = 2, then 2 + 2 should equal 4, right? So.
You just boil those spirals and then put them in, or you just throw them in?
So we got hot water on demand. So I'll typically soak them in 180-degree water, make sure they're kind of like passive and those kind of things, and then we'll throw them in afterwards. So.
Throw in the water that you boil them in still too? Or
No. We typically toss that out. But.
So Tim wanted me to ask you, so that's going to be do you harvest your own yeast and do you reuse and repitch for your own harvest yeast?
From time to time. On the scale we're on, we found certain yeasts that we like. And also too, again, we're not necessarily in that production brewery kind of lineup to where we need to, we've got 2 house yeasts, we make 90% of our portfolio is 3 beers, and we have to make this, this, and this, and this. We're not in that realm, so we don't have to worry about trying to do cost saving and pitching from here to here. We are luckily in that weird realm of still being able to be creative. So, when we can, and when it makes sense, obviously, like say when we do the dry stout next week, we'll take it out, we'll repitch onto another imperial stout that we're doing like the following week, because we know we'll have the cell count, those kind of things. But we're not beholden to specific yeasts. So we can kind of write that into the cost analysis of the recipe and go, all right, cool, we want to do a Belgian. Well, we don't have a Belgian house yeast, so let's explore some cool Belgian yeasts. It also puts us in a cool realm too, to where, like, again, reaching out to your fellow brewers who are on a much bigger scale. We've gone to a couple places where they're dumping yeast, like literally just gallons of yeast down the drain. Well, I have any that I want to brew next week, so I'll show them a little bucket.
So we should go to the local breweries on brew day and ask for some yeast.
And then tell them that Chris sent you.
Nope, don't do that. Don't do that. I'll be honest, it's much more a pain in the. It's not worth $7 for them to give you a mason jar yeast. But no, so like it really just depends. Like we are in that very fortunate realm of we can kind of absorb the cost a little bit to make something a little bit more fun and exciting. We're not beholden to a specific yeast strain, but like I said, when it does make sense and when we can, we will. So
Recently, Ocean Sun closed up, and they auctioned off their equipment. So, what's his name? Travis. And how did he find out about that?
oh, I don't know. You'd have to talk. Yeah.
I mean, what are your ideas of buying used equipment? That
Know your system. That's all. Just like know the parameters of it.
It's all stainless steel.
Like, it doesn't really depreciate. I mean, like we could probably sell this tomorrow for a pretty good amount of we've taken care of it. And, we haven't really beat it up or anything. Like it does what it says it needs to do.
So you're okay with buying something that's a better deal?
Understand the business, understand where it was, what they were doing with it, check all the variables, know that system. Like even if you don't, maybe hire a consultant who can tell you all the parameters around that system. Maybe they weren't taking care of their steam jackets and you've got a bunch of calcium buildup within your jackets. Who knows?
Cracked or something.
Or something's cracked, or maybe the rakes are running weird and they don't have full control over the motor. Or like,
how would you tell them? Do you just have to look?
You got to know. And if you don't know, you probably want to hire somebody who does.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I'll jump in on that too real quick because we were actually in line to purchase that system.
Yeah.
And one thing that I talked to was a consulting company, MW Controls, here in Orlando. They're also out of Ireland. But they actually were talking with me, and the cost behind recommissioning a system that has been moved can sometimes exceed the cost of the system itself and make the whole price of the package more expensive than just buying a new system and having the manufacturer come in and commission it for you.
That's
So it's a risk that you take, but it's coming knowing what you're buying and saying, okay, well I can do this myself, or it's going to cost me $20 grand to have someone move it.
That, and then also on that same vein too, understanding all the parameters around it. Just because you bought that new system doesn't mean that you can just put the same steam jacket or the steam boiler in your place. Or can you lay steam pipe? Like, do you know somebody who can? Like all those different things that surround that aspect of it, and not really letting anything surprise you or shock you as far as unexpected expenses go. Right? Yeah, you're better money than I am, so that makes sense, right?
So I know you said you moved a lot of your beers that you wanted to clear out your lager and stuff in the right tin. Do you put any additional refining agents in there? Or because I know some of them like fish bladder, like dinner seasons.
Like isinglass and those kind of things.
Don't want or isinglass. Some people don't want that, if they're trying to avoid it. Hard product.
So we use a vegan-friendly fining agent that we like. For certain things, so other things like if you understand your yeast, sometimes you don't really have to worry about them. Like I know that if we ever use like SO4 or like some of the high flocculating English yeast, that we typically can just kind of let it sit for a few days and it'll crash out pretty good. My motto is if it's not ready to be poured out of the fermenter, don't move it to the bright tank. We just look at this as a packaging. So when I said that earlier, it might have been a little misleading.
Okay.
We're not like moving dirty beer into here to let it like fall out. But it's still going through that same process. That's one of the best parts about having those conical fermenters is at any given time you can roll up and just pour off whatever gross shit's on the bottom, right? So if you've got a pretty good standard operating procedure, then by the time you're ready to move it, it should be right around the same clarity that you're expecting it to be in the bright tank already.
So you have a cold pressure.
Oh yeah, totally.
Do you find that
Cold
you use,
crash makes a big difference.
1000%. You should definitely be using or be cold crash. What's
do
up?
you find that you use finding agents a lot though in the beers that you're
No,
drinking?
just certain
Or, like,
ones.
naturally they tend to.
Again, it really depends on your yeast and your understanding of the yeast. Like there's certain yeast that we know we pretty much have to write that into the recipe. Like we're going to be using this. We're going to have to make sure that we've got a few days for that to happen. But there's other ones where we know, all right, we can let it sit for like 4 days and it's going to be fine. So, anybody?
So, brewing has a bunch of tiny little details that sometimes matter, sometimes don't. So, what are some details that you guys find that make your beer a lot tastier, and what are some details that aren't really working together?
What are things that you're worried about or concerned about?
So, for me, I've got most of my process down. My efficiency is consistent, but I'm wondering, like, do I need to worry more about my water profile or mash pH or mash temperature? Like, does it really make a difference if I mash at 5.4 or
1000%.
5.2 or 5.6?
Yep. So the one thing I would throw out there right away is that, like one thing that I found with home brewing, I think a lot of people get really hung up very quickly on efficiency. While and yes, you should be worried about efficiency, but at the same time, on the scale of a homebrew scale, like not to say anything belittling it, but like the difference of malt is literally dollars. Like it's next to nothing. Whereas physics, biochemistry, those kind of things are absolutes. They will happen better in certain ranges. So it's like I would say start focusing on, obviously mash pH is a huge one. Cell counts is a huge one. Water can be one of the most complicated, but also one of the most simple things to start manipulating too. And it may not happen right away for you as you start playing with it, but just kind of being a little more cognitive of, all right, I'm going to try to build this water profile a little bit better to this style. Those are, and again, these are things that be prepared for them to take a while to show results. Be prepared for you to have some failures in it. It's going to happen. But like I can tell you, like again, it's on that same fallback of just because you read it doesn't mean that it's always true. Oftentimes people read these things and they don't ask why or why not. You know what I mean? So our mash pH, like sometimes we'll go outside of the normal range and it works. It hasn't not worked, right? So we know that it'll work for certain styles a little better than it'll work for others. And it's basically just like one time we might have messed up and we were a little off with our acid additions and it went a little lower or a little higher, but it worked out great. And so it's one of those like, all right, cool. It doesn't line up with what's in the textbooks, but it works out great. So same kind of thing with water too. I think water is a huge difference. What's up? Yeah. So starting to get, water can be a very complicated thing, and it can be a very daunting kind of like just almost mentally constipating thing too. So just learning the basics and like taking time to just go, all right, so like what is calcium? What is it doing? What is my calcium content? You know, like should I be adding more or a little less? And just playing around with stuff. Give yourself 6 months to a year to just kind of see what works best for your palate.
So for me, like for my maltier beers, I'll do like 150 chloride, 100 sulfate. You know, I switch it if I'm doing some coffee. Do you find like you have like a certain range that works well for you, or do you have the resources you use to say, hey, if I'm doing this style, I really want to get this exact profile?
So okay, again, this salt. Water is one of those weird things to where you read a lot of absolutes. If you want a 2-to-1 on either chloride, sulfate, or sulfate to chloride, depending on your IPAs or your multi-beers, this, that, or whatever. Imagine so when you're writing, like, say, a stout recipe, how often are you researching your malts?
I always try to keep it really simple. Base, one crystal, and.
But you know that crystal, right? Did you pick the number, like, specifically, or?
Just, I honestly don't really taste the difference between 20, 40, and 80 and
Okay.
in a stout, so I go with 40.
Sure.
Kind of
But
works,
you found something that worked for you.
It's purely a guess.
And you took that time to find something that worked for you. So water is very much the same kind of thing. So in that same realm, I guess to kind of bring it back is whatever style you're making, understand like what your yeast needs, because your yeast is going to need certain minerals and stuff like that, like magnesium and zinc and those kind of things, right? Your recipe itself, calcium is a huge thing for mash pH, for residual flavor, hardness, those kind of things, right? So understanding what these elements do, and then just kind of taking your own understanding and either playing with it or trying to learn from it. Does that make sense?
Right. So basically, like do a recipe 2 or 3 times, but play around.
Sure. Like, yeah, do that. But also kind of try to cognitively look at your water as an ingredient as well. So, like, you have the ability to change this stuff. So instead of just following instead of somebody coming up and be like, here, use this pale malt, like, take some time to be like, all right, well, I'm using a pale malt. Do I want to use Golden Promise? Do I want to use Raw Tuba? Do I want to use Marisol? Or, like, what am I making? What do I think is going to resonate best with the recipe? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just kind of, like, playing around with those kind of things. Yeah. So yeah, definitely like those kind of things. Focus on those for sure. So.
For your hobby beers, are you strict about checking the pH of the whole process, like mash, pre-boil, post-boil? Do you pay a lot of attention to that, or are you concentrate mostly on the mash pH?
So once you get into on the production side of brewing, you'll typically monitor pH pretty much throughout the entire process. So you'll monitor mash pH, pre-boil, you monitor post-boil. And then pretty much whenever you're taking gravities, you also measure pH.
You find like it makes a big difference when you're like post-boil is like at a certain level as opposed to.
I think it really depends on your process, but it can be a pretty good indicator if something's wrong. You typically want to shoot from anywhere from like 5 to 5.3. If it's a little higher, a little lower, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
Like if it's lower, you maybe use a lot of like acrid, like high roasted malts, and maybe it dropped a little bit lower than you expected. But so long as the final product doesn't care, then I don't think you should either. But if for some reason you're way out of range, it could be indicative of a problem. So.
How do you go about predicting pH and knowing how much acid going in malt or lactic acid?
It's kind of knowing your system, really. It took a while to kind of dial it in, but like it's this weird kind of like, what's your shirt say? Kentucky Windage?
Kentucky Windage, a little bit of that.
Oh yeah, 1000%. So is everyone familiar with that term?
Nope.
Yeah.
Alright. You could probably do a far better term explaining it, but I'll give you a quick rundown. So, like if you're shooting through your sights, right? And you fire it, and it hits like 2 feet over this way, you're like, oh shit. So instead of dealing with this, you just now know whenever you fire, aim 2 feet to the left, right? So it's that same kind of thing like with whatever software you're using. It's that same kind of buffering thing.
I'm finding things like I don't use brewed water because you have to have Microsoft Office.
But again, that's a very specific thing to you.
I use Easy Water and I compare it to Beersman.
Yeah.
And it appears that Easy Water generally predicts a slightly higher pH than what I actually come out with.
Again, your system. Do you know the pH of your starting water?
Right now I use RO and I customize my water for the beer.
Are you taking a pH every time?
Well, I don't check the pH until I mash it.
See, that's the thing. Who knows? Maybe something's wrong.
Should be
Not saying that something is wrong with the filter, but like if it's not working the way it should, could literally be a 0.1, 0.2 degree variance.
Usually what I come up with is my first round is pH around 5.2.
Yeah.
My sparge water, because I do batch sparge, comes out at the end of that is around 5.6. And I usually end up with working in the kettle at around 5.
That's fine.
And that's not adding anything, but I'm getting ready to do a Pilsner, and I have a feeling that I'm going to need to add some simulated malt or something because it's the darker. The darker the malts drives the pH down.
Yeah, but you can also use lactic acid, phosphoric acid, whatever.
So I kind of, my impression is once you've got it in the mash tub and you're checking your pH is low, you're kind of screwed, aren't you?
You can always add more and stir it around, homogenize it.
Throw some baking soda.
Baking soda is actually going to raise it, yeah.
Either baking soda or...
Trying to sabotage somebody, man.
Either baking soda or lactic acid.
Yeah.
I went so far as to calculate how many grams of lactic acid 1 milliliter weighs.
Well, that is very specific. I don't have that time.
Well, yeah, but the lactic acid comes in milliliters, and most of the brewing things that I have specify in grams.
Yeah.
So I know 1.2 grams of lactic acid. 1 milliliter weighs 1.2 grams.
So does Google. Google knows it too. That's what I'm typically doing.
Well, that's how I found it out. But,
Fair enough.
But now I know how much to add by weight.
Do you have a preferred water tool, like running water?
I think I use Easy Water. And again, I do that whole Kentucky Windage thing, but it's not immediate. It's not like I'm gonna dial it every single time, but I know kind of like that weird range. And luckily on the size that we're on, obviously 1 milliliter for additions to a 5 gallon or 10 gallon batch is gonna make a very degree difference. Where if I do 10 milliliters and 100 and something gallons of something, it's going to be very minute. So I can always kind of work my way in. I don't want to overshoot, obviously, but if I can undershoot it a little bit, and then kind of work my way back up. I don't mind taking another 15 minutes to just stir it up, make sure it's all good, just make sure I'm getting that pH. Again, making sure that you focus on those parameters too. So, kind of on that same vein of knowing your system, know your process. Like, what's the most optimal process for all these different things, and then setting that in line for your SOP, and not ever wavering from that. But also kind of identifying how your ingredients are kind of manipulated too. So, again, like having things like high roasted malts, you don't have to have as much acid. So doing the research on the different ingredients and what their effects are on certain things. So.
Do you use pH strips to check?
No, we've got a pH meter.
Meter?
Yeah. So.
Who do you use?
Milwaukee?
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, they're pretty good.
Cheap. I bought a Home Brewers.
Honestly, man, like that's one of those, like, invest in your equipment. Like, I know a lot of reasons why people get into home brewing and stuff is because, like, you kind of do things on the cheap, kind of like jerry rig some stuff, and it always works out, it's good. But also, when it comes to things like quantifying things, like hydrometers, refractometers, like pH meters, like, just spend the money, man. Like, that extra $40 is going to save you 3 to 4 years of a headache. So.
I'd be interested in seeing yours.
What's that?
I might be interested in seeing your pH.
It's only like 150 on Amazon.
Yep.
I'll have to look because one this supply sells in Milwaukee. Doesn't have a way to the elements versus the solution when you're storing it.
Yeah, so that's one of those things too. Is like, and honestly nowadays, like seriously, with Amazon and the amount of stuff that they have out there, just do your research. Make sure you got your buffer solution. Make sure you got your calibrating solutions. Like, you know that because you've done research on what it takes to maintain a pH meter. And then just make sure you got everything set in line for it. These are investments, so you want to make sure that they're laying around for a while and that you're doing the right thing to them that they can do to you. So.
Yeah, my system's so ghetto, man. I'm scared to use like
Dude, honestly though, like, it's funny you say that.
That's when we first met.
Dude, not only that too, man, like, I think it makes you kind of appreciate, and honestly it might make you better at things down the road too, because like we'll go do collabs and stuff, and we work on this guy, and this guy's like manual as shit. However, we'll go to another place and it's automated rakes and like push button. Hardest thing is like taking the picture while you're raking out mash, like, and then driving a forklift to get it all out.
Equipment probably cost me about $300.
Yeah, see, that's awesome.
It's cheap as hell.
So when we go there, we're just like, this is ridiculous. This is what you brew on all the time. This is awesome. So yeah. Question?
What did it take for you guys to get into the aspect of canning?
So we just basically went through a mobile canner. Mobile canner?
Okay, so I thought you had to invest into.
You can. It's just a matter of whether or not it makes sense for your business plan, right? So I know some people kind of shy away from it because maybe it doesn't make sense for a return on investment in their window. It's the numbers seem to line up. It worked for us. We did a lot of work to make sure that we found a mobile canner that actually took a lot of pride in what they're doing. I have worked with mobile canners before to where they think just because they buy a canning line and they load a keg of Sandy that they're good to go. And so I've heard horror stories too, man. So just do your research. Again, understanding the variables of the process. Like, so they come in and they can. Do you know what they're looking for? Like, understand what, like, be them for a second. Understand what they're looking for. Is your product at the right volume of CO2? Is it the right temperature? Do you have the right regular setups? Do you have the right, all that kind of stuff? Are they taking DO readings? Are they like checking dissolved oxygen? What's the lining of their cans? What's their typical shelf life? What's their, their lab procedures? Like those kind of things. Like, they're offering you a product, but you should also vet them too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the most nerve-wracking thing is when the cans leave when your beer leaves your door and it's not in your control anymore. So that's definitely, we would have never gone through the company we went through if we hadn't seen many a times good quality results with different breweries.
Yeah, we contacted other friends of ours who had actually worked with them and stuff to make sure that they had really good experiences too.
They vetted them for you.
Oh yeah. Well, because in an ideal world, like you would come in, you would buy a 4-pack, right? And you would go home and put it in your fridge immediately.
Yeah.
You would drink all of them within 24 hours. You
Yes.
would never have to worry about any sort of anything.
No.
Whereas
Doesn't happen.
the worst thing would be like you pick it up and you throw it in the back seat, it stays back there for 3 or 4 days.
Or yeah, people are
In
visiting
Florida weather,
Orlando,
yeah,
Disney, leaving in the
car. And then they like, oh man, shit, I got relatives, so I'm gonna move all the stuff into the trunk real quick. And it sits in there for another 4 days. And then you throw it on the shelf, and then all of a sudden it's in the fridge for maybe a week. And then you try it, and you're like, this tastes like, this brew is terrible. Like, not the fact that it was treated incorrectly.
No, yeah, yeah.
Making sure that the product itself is put through the parameters to where it can still survive that. Right. So.
Wow, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys done any fruited IPAs or specifically wild IPAs? And part two of that question is, when in the process do you introduce the fruit?
We only did one guava beer. But I think I'm gonna tell you that.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
So we've done fruited IPAs before, yeah. We have Tanky, which is an apricot hazy IPA. And then we've done one with guava. Are you just kind of working on something with guava specifically right now, or?
I want to.
Okay. So I guess the big thing is, what is your guava source?
I don't have
Okay. If you go out and you buy it, obviously you have chunks, those kind of things. If you're buying whole fruit, then you got to worry about the fact that it may not be sanitary, it may not be pasteurized. If you're going out and you're buying like some sort of maybe not concentrate, but maybe pulp or something like that, it may be aseptic, but also at the same time you got a lot of bits floating around, so you need to worry about your conditioning times. Me personally, just as a rule of thumb, I never ever ever recommend adding your fruit to the hot side at all. Never add it to boil.
Mid to tail end.
Yeah, definitely mid to tail end. Like your biggest concerns with fruit is making sure it's clean, and then doing the best you can to make sure that a lot of those fruit flavors kind of still stay saturated within the product, right? So if you're doing guava, I used to when I was homebrewing. What's that one Latin company? Goya. Yeah, Goya does a lot of really cool frozen fruit purees.
That is good. Be careful with that. I did a Belgian triple one time. I let it set for 2 weeks.
Okay.
So 1 week, man, was all I was able to get out of that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'd be curious to see what other things were going on too. They're typically frozen. They're typically, I think they're aseptic because they're food grade. So obviously they wouldn't sell you something that should make you sick, right? And they're relatively cheap, so you can get about 2 or 3 of them, and they lend a pretty good flavor. As a rule of thumb, we typically add kind of toward the tail end of fermentation to where the yeast is still kind of doing its thing. It's looking for simple sugars, because if you look at all the different sugars throughout fermentation, it's obviously jumped through the simple ones first and then trying to work on the more longer chain ones. So if you find that window where maybe Krausen's kind of settling down a little bit, and it seems to start slowing down just a wee bit, maybe add it then. It'll help ferment out a lot of the sugars, and then also it'll kind of stabilize the final product a little bit better. I always kind of recommend a cold crash too if you're going to do that, just because you want to make sure it's not pulpy and weird and gross.
The cold crash, how cold do you get it?
Depends on the beer. I've always just done 32 to 34. So hazies I'll do a little higher, but at the same time I've seen things go down a little bit, down to the 32 range. We had to do 32 for fanny pack, and the haze stays around just fine. So I guess it just depends on the beer, but anything from what I've been taught, anything below 37 helps participate those kind of polyphenol and protein kind of extra. So yeah.
Speaking of cold crashing, at least when you were doing home brewing, did you ever cold side oxidation?
Prevent cold side oxidation? Are you bottling, kegging?
Okay.
Kegging? Okay. Do you typically have an extra keg around?
Yeah.
So what I would do if I were you, if you've got the means, maybe invest in just kind of a bright tank keg, right? And you can essentially do a closed loop transfer out of your carboy. So you can build something up to where you apply just a slight positive pressure to the carboy that allows it to kind of push a lot of liquid into the keg. Being that the keg is already CO2 purged, all that kind of stuff, and you can build a little pressure relief valve on the keg too. So that way when you're filling, you can kind of release pressure, it'll basically fill it up. And basically just use that keg as a cold crash mechanism. You can put it on a 5 to 10 PSI blanket, so that way it doesn't condense or contract or implode or anything. I would let it sit there, just don't move it for 4 or 5 days. And then you could basically just hook up your transfer system and hook it into another keg, transfer clean beer. Run the first bits off if you can, obviously, but it should settle out pretty quick, if that makes sense. Right? Cool. Yeah.
See, I see most of the time with cold crashing, they use it in secondary. And usually it's like say you have the fur monster, the plastic one,
Mhm.
it just kind of pretty much collapse.
So
They don't want, so you run a tube over to it, so basically you got star sand, water, and everything. There's a chance it's going to suck that into the beer.
agreed. So typically, whenever I cold crash before I use closed systems like that, you are like just thermal dynamics is going to dictate that the liquid itself is going to condense and it's going to bring positive pressure in with it. So it's going to want to equalize itself, right? So if you have an airlock, I typically recommend using something like vodka or something like that, just something like a very neutral spirit that still kind of like disinfects a little bit
So put that in.
into the airlock.
Set the water level low enough to seal it.
Yep.
Not enough for it to be gone.
But I've also heard a lot of people with different opinions. You can do like a ridiculously long airlock too. Like I'm talking 10 feet of all this stuff, purge it with CO2, and then stick it in the the star sand. Yeah, and that I've heard that works out too. Yeah, I mean, hell, spend the extra $3 on it. You know what I mean?
It's like a blow-up tube for cold crashing, which is great. Like it'll suck the airlock back into it.
Yeah.
You use like a blow-up tube, which is great. It'll suck it up, but like not enough to get all the way back into the container.
So it's just kind of like finding what works best for you. One of the things though too is I've even heard somebody use like a balloon full of CO2 and just place the balloon. Yeah. So. Which actually, if you sanitize the balloon and keep it in a sterile environment, makes sense because even if it goes super negative, it'll start sucking in. But, I mean, at the same time, it'll help displace that negative pressure. So.
There's a device that I think Tilt makes, the Tilt hydrometers, Play-Doh, and they're like $20 or something like that, but 10, yeah. It allows for negative pressure, so it actually will, it's a check valve essentially. So it'll allow your airlock on the top to bubble away like crazy during fermentation. When you're cold crashing, it won't allow anything back in. It doesn't even suck back with the actual.
How does it
airlock.
displace the
It's
negative?
called Tilt. I'm not sure. It's Play-Doh.
So it's still great pressure.
Is that the one that has the Bluetooth for your graphics?
It is, but this is an accessory for it. So you don't actually buy the Play-Doh itself. But it's like $10. And it's a little tiny thing that goes between your hydrometer and your fermenter, and it's
Has anyone
like a
ever
check valve.
Has anyone used this on glass at all?
We've used them in stainless and had great
I
success.
think the only thing you have to be worried about is the fur monster, because it kind of thin plastic.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, I'm too plastic.
I've had so many blow up that now I just use a half-inch diameter blow up on primary, and when I cold crash it, it's not going to suck that.
We use a full inch and a half.
But I've already tried it. I put 3-foot long hose in the star sand and tried to suck through it. You can't get it up to your mouth, so it's not going to.
There you go. Any other question? Yes.
What about fermenting in the fresh one?
So we've never done it personally. It can kind of help with a lot of different situations. It can reduce ester production. It can reduce kind of like aldehydes, those kind of thing. Fusel alcohols. It's very, very yeast specific. So are you kind of more so talking about maybe that new like White Labs high pressure lager yeast kind of thing, or?
No, just in general, like why, like in what scenarios people might choose to ferment the pressure instead of not like end pressure.
This is something I'll definitely say I'm not fully well versed in. So anything I do say, I'll tell you what I don't know, right? What I can say is the higher pressure you go, obviously the more stress you can put on specific yeast strains. So to the point where it can be detrimental to your fermentation. However, you could also find a really good middle ground in those. Funneling valves, some more historical traditional methods are typically used for capturing that CO2 back in solution. And you can look at that as a gift and a curse. If you are a big production brewery and you're not trying to add a lot of CO2 and you're trying to like save on costs and those kind of things, you obviously want to try to utilize any natural resource that you possibly have. So you want to reintegrate that in. However, like say maybe you have a very high DMS or you're going through a diacetyl rest or maybe you have a high sulfur output or something like that, you also have to take that into account too, because if that high sulfur air is being blown out and it's being reabsorbed, then you have the sulfur problem again, right? So I think it really just depends on your setup, what your purpose is. For home brewing, I mean, I wouldn't personally ever really look into it for any reason unless you're really trying to speed something up and like you just got to cap it at the end or something. Again, I know White Labs has been talking about, or they have been doing a high pressure yeast, lager yeast, which essentially at standard ale temperatures recreates the same stress fractions that they usually go in colder facilities. But I've had some really good ones. I've had some really weird ones. But just, I don't know, depends on what you're playing around with. And again, just understanding the variety of the yeast. Sorry for the very long-winded answer. If you haven't noticed, it's kind of a habit. So.
Now, I mean, I've heard aspects with opening a new brewery such that the work-life balance is interesting, to say the least.
There is.
That's what I mean.
It's
Has
just
that
work
changed?
and work.
for you guys?
There's just nothing else.
It's work and sleep.
Has that changed in the past year for you guys now, since you've gotten a little bit more?
You want to take that one first, buddy? No.
No.
But I mean, it is every once in a while we'll sit down and we'll have a couple beers at the end of like a long brew day. It is fulfilling, you know. You get to see this thing that you envisioned like years ago, and it's actually come to fruition. And you can see people enjoying the beers that you put your sweat into. It's well worth it, you know. And if you go into a business and you expect everything to be fine and dandy after 1 year, then you're probably not the best business owner. It's just we knew going into this it's going to be like this for a couple of years. But yeah, we have no life.
No.
But we have the coolest job ever, and it is what it is, man.
Yeah, second marriage here.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. He's basically my husband. He doesn't
Basically, wow.
Who's the
Yeah.
other guy?
No, but I think it really depends on the person too. I mean, like I know a lot of people who, you know, they could probably endure a lot more than we've endured, but at the same time, I know probably a couple of people who probably couldn't go through what we've gone through. At the end of the day, like you said, I mean, like we did what we wanted to do. And you can, like the day to day can be very frustrating, and the day to day can be very like grinding and those kind of things. But at the same time, like you get to make. Like you guys are standing here asking us questions. This is stupid. Like this is insane to me. Like why you're asking us is insane. But getting to a point to where like this is happening is very very fulfilling. And I don't.
Well, look how good y'all did on Beer Fest.
I don't know a lot of friends or family members of mine who can say that they have that same conduit.
Yeah.
So without going out and actually getting it. Right? So
Awesome. Thank you.
What families do you use?
We used Amlo 300.
I've used the powder and had pretty great success with it, like powder.
So a couple questions. Well, actually one fast real quick. Not all amylase enzymes are produced the same way. They use different molds, different ways of actually producing. So certain ones are capable of things that maybe others aren't, and vice versa. When were you adding it?
Oh, there was like two methods to do it. So I did both. I did it. I don't remember. Was it in the mash, and then also some people do it secondary. So I did both, or not secondary, into primary. I did both of them, and it's still just like didn't get all like one. It was like
What do you shoot?
Like 1 to 9.
Okay, so 1 to 9. Okay, wow. So I've seen a couple different ways. I've seen people use it in the mash, and it typically works out well. But you're not going to get down to that 1 to 1.002, and you might, but I haven't seen it happen yet. Kind of almost treating it the same way as you would fruit, as a fruit addition, to where you're doing it mid fermentation, to where it allows it to work in, parallel with the yeast, as opposed to it being done, then adding it, and then the yeast having to re-wake up and try to eat these new things, even though it's already in pretty much a lag phase at that point. We've typically just kind of done it right around 50 to 60% attenuation. Has worked out pretty well. Yeah, because the idea of the amylase is essentially the broad picture is it's helping. It's a parallel fermentation. So while your regular yeast is working on these simple sugars and fructose and glucose and those kind of things, this one's going to be working on breaking down the maltose into smaller ones that this can then start eating as well. So these need to be active and running for this to be able to provide it food. Does that make sense?
Do you think it's more yeast for the fruits, or should it be the same?
It should be about the same. Essentially, the yeast itself doesn't know any different, because if the enzyme's working correctly, it's just making maltose and the same thing that it would already be eating. But you just want to make sure you hit it before that window of the factor where they start realizing there's not really much more food source and kind of dying. But you guys know a lot of roots too. What have you guys found as far as success goes?
That's a question for her.
Yeah. I know you've tried a few different ways, right?
Yeah, I had really good success with doing it in mash. I tried doing mash and fermentation. I just prefer that flavor that came from it. I don't know if hops or
Yeah. But then again, that's like the big gift that you guys have too on the scale is play around with it. Like find what works best for you. This is all subjective. It's just realizing what variables you can take off.
That's a two-part question.
Sure.
What's your experience with hop creep, and then what's your procedure at the scale for VDK testing?
So VDK is just sensory right now. We don't really have anything to quantify it as far as lab equipment goes, but we'll typically do like taste panel kind of stuff. So with lager, we'll run it through just kind of like a heat phase, let it sit there for a while, bring it back down, and then we'll just kind of surprise the staff and Doug. And I usually catch him in the middle of an email and he gets really frustrated. And then just kind of see if we pick anything up. So also trying to utilize the staff too. Like we know that some of them are a little bit more susceptible to it, so we might just throw them a sample and not say anything about it. And if they go, ugh, then you might get a reconfirmation that it's still in there. So that's for VDK. For hop creep, we've never seen an issue, but again, we're not on a scale to where it's something that presents itself as a possible issue. Granted, we just did the canning, right? But at the same time, it's all gone. So and hopefully people are drinking it within the next month or two, and we don't have to worry about re-fermentation, those kind of things. I have heard some companies having issues with that, and it's still kind of an ongoing thing that people are still trying to really fully understand. But we don't really take it into concern really, because a lot of our big dry hop stuff is usually cleared out pretty good. If it's more traditional, it's cleared out and then we dry hop at like a lower temperature, or we're doing that dry hop mid fermentation. So anything that would happen should theoretically happen the same way anyway, right? So does that answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that like shelf life has a lot to play into that though? Like the idea is to sell your beer as fast as possible so that you don't even experience hop creep, you don't get to that point? Or does hop creep happen quickly as far as?
I don't know enough about hop creep to be able to answer that specifically. But what I can tell you as far as our end goes is, like we said earlier, we're tailoring our product to sit on a shelf in the worst conditions possible for 3 months. And if we can do that, then we're good.
No guarantees.
No, yeah, just don't leave it in your trunk, please. We worked really hard on it. So I'll be honest, that's one realm where we're like, don't know enough about it. The issues that I
think
have.
in the industry as a whole, there's still a lot more.
There's still a lot to be done, yes.
Us personally, we haven't had any issues with it, but we know people that have. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've had certain ideas like hazies and dry hop stuff that we've sat around for a decent amount of, like, not sat around like in a bad way, but like we've sat on for a decent amount of time just to kind of see sensory wise like cans or those kind of things. And we've never really noticed a big influx as far as we're not seeing geysers or re-fermentation. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
When you say you had some of your product in cans, you hire a canning company to come in here and can for you?
Yeah.
They bring the cans and everything, or is your label on
So
it?
we buy the cans, we buy the labels, we buy the materials essentially, and then they show up one day and they've got a certain parameter that they want the product within, as far as like CO2 and temperature and all that kind of stuff. They hook up, they bust it out, and get out.
They just run it through and they're done in 6 hours?
He was here for it, I wasn't here for it.
They showed up at 8. They got everything set up for us at 9. They rolled out at
That was 100
4
cases?
hours. That's 100 cases.
That's probably what, 48
It takes me that long to follow 2 cases.
like that?
What?
Probably a 48 can per minute kind of system or something.
Dude, I don't even know, man.
Yeah, it's quick. I mean, they bring in 3 guys that just run it.
It takes me that long to follow 2 cases.
Yeah.
It takes me that long to cake by cake.
Right? What's up, Mike?
Your time over at Siebel, was there any takeaways that you took from there that you would want to apply to back to work?
There's so many things that you don't know that you don't know. It's insane. It's a very fat, like, I could talk about that for
His
hours.
first thing was getting us a new set of Safety Pro
That was the first thing I did. Literally talked for about 45 minutes. There was a class of about 30 to 32 people. A lot of them worked in production breweries. And the amount of eyeballs lost, holy shit.
Seriously?
Just get iPro, just wear them. Why not? Pressure, chemicals, hot water, those kind of things. One thing can go wrong. Yeah, 1,000%. But on that same thing, this can be the most complicated thing you ever want it to be. This can be the most in-depth thing you ever want it to be, or it can be the most simple thing you ever want it to be. Take from it however you want to take from it. Wherever you're comfortable stopping your brewing process, stop there. But understand, no matter how far you get, there's so much you don't know. Like, no one will ever know it. It's insane. There's a lot of things that I took away that we'll start implementing specifically over time, like in a very small, gradual way. But again, these are things that maybe they wouldn't have latched on if we hadn't been in the specific situation with, say, this system, how we operate, these tanks, our glycol, the way that we operate, right? A lot of the information was kind of the same information you usually read, like the actual process and different variables and stuff or whatever. But there's so many things that you can manipulate. Like if you're paying attention, get creative, and fully understand a lot of stuff, I think it really opens your eyes to, all right, not every malt is malt, not crystal malt is caramel, not this yeast is that yeast, or this cell count's that cell count. So like start looking into why, what does it do, and how can we manipulate that for advantage, right? Does that make sense?
No, perfect.
So
Thank you.
Time to go home.
what's up, buddy?
For like advanced expert people like yourself, what are some of your favorite resources for education?
Thank you, by the way. I don't consider myself that.
You're making money at it, you're an expert.
I don't know, man. It's hard to. It just kind of depends on what you're gravitating towards at the time, right? Brewers Association is great. If no one here has looked into BJCP, just like do it, man. I can't tell you how much I learned about how not to brew beer, some mistakes that you can have by trying a lot of other beers out there, or things that like I would try a beer during judging and be like, damn, that's amazing. How did they do that? And then maybe find a new process that I would start implementing. Going through that process, if you haven't already done it, and getting certified and all that kind of stuff, like makes you a far better just taster, beer drinker. Like it takes a lot of like the subjectivity out of it. Like it doesn't matter how you feel about it. It either is or it isn't, right? Honestly, physics, biochemistry, like fluid dynamics, those kind of things that just don't change. They just always are. I think a lot of people romanticize this idea of like, oh, we're making this beautiful product, and we really are, right? But also at the same time, it only operates within the same realm that nature allows it to operate in. So understanding all those things as well. I don't know. It just really depends on what you're gravitating towards at the time. So if you have anything you're looking into, feel free to let me know afterwards, man. I'll see if I got something for you. But
I heard you just got back from Chicago from the Seidel Brewing College or something up there.
Yeah, see what?
What did you take away from that?
All that my brain is mush now. No, like I kind of like what I was telling him is there's so much to learn about everything. I was very fortunate to have conversations with people who've been working for Miller Coors or Guinness for 20, 30 years, or people who've been basically like installing beer systems where, they may not know much about recipe development, but at the same time they can tell you why that 1/4-inch gasket versus the 1/2-inch gasket is going to fail within 3 months, and you should probably be cognizant of the fact that your water's 160 instead of 170. Like all these weird little variables that can go on that like you can be paying attention to all the time. I guess the biggest thing was like when you feel comfortable with something, stop and then try to make it uncomfortable again. Like what do you not understand about it? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
that was what, St. John's Gate, the guy from Guinness?
No. It was I'd have to look in the notes again, but probably people you wouldn't really know. They just kind of work specifically for the companies. They weren't really brand ambassadors or anything. But very good. Did we run out? Do we have any more?
How on the business side of things, how did you kind of get the wheels started on it? Did you come up with a business plan? Did you like how did you kind of get the wheels turning on that?
Not myself. I got my master's in business over at UCF, and just pretty much built a business plan using all my professor to stay after class every single day. Chris and I met at a home brewing club. God, I always say 5 years. It's like 6 years ago or more now.
Yeah, Steve was probably there.
Yeah.
I remember it. I remember the first time you guys met, actually.
Did you hear the sound of romance?
Yeah, we created a business plan, and I kind of showed him, and he had a lot more experience within the industry than I did. And after a few of those meetings, we ended up deciding to kind of take over each other's weaknesses and strengths and just create tactical. Here we are. But yeah, no, there's years and years behind it. But yeah, it's crazy. That's why still for us, we're like, I feel like the place isn't even open.
No, it's so weird. Like, it's telling him, like, I often have to stop and like, practice gratitude a lot because I'm like, shit, like, you're just so locked into every day, everything needs to be done, this, and like, giving yourself a second to be like, wow, we actually, this is really cool. So, yeah.
I still remember your Hefe from the Land Beer Fest like 2 years ago. Was that
Oh,
what it
yeah?
was? Yeah, that was great.
Thanks, man. That's actually the same one we have on now. Yeah.
Well, not a Monterey, I can't like-
Yeah, the first FA we ever made.
Don't change it.
Yeah, right? Any other questions?
Not really a process or anything, question like that. Just, what's your favorite commercial failure? Like, is there anything that you brewed that you were really proud of or really excited about that just never took off with the?
Oh, so many of them. What? You want to go first?
Good question.
I already know what your answer
We're going to give
is.
it to
Well,
Oh, dude, Labella Catastrophe was one of my favorite things ever that we made. So we made a brewed IPA with Calista and what was the other? I think it was Amarillo Calista. And we did it was an all Britannomyces fermentation. So we, you hear this whole thing of just like, oh, you can't do it. Don't bring it in here. Fuck, bring it in. Right? So we did it. It worked out. It worked out great. And that was like. I tried to remain humble about a lot of things. We tried to not sit there and like, walk around and be like, oh, we're awesome. That was one of the best beers we've ever made. Like, that's one of the best beers I've ever been part of. From a technical process standpoint, that was awesome.
you could see your finger through the glass.
Yeah.
Like it was.
I could hold it up right now and still see your facial reaction through that beer. It was amazing, and it was down to like 1.001, and had like this weird kind of cool hoppy thing with like a slight Brett funk.
I'd say the failure aspect of that was we had been open maybe 4 or 5 months at that point, and we're still trying to teach everyone.
Yeah.
So there's a very small percentage of people that actually like could appreciate that beer.
Yeah.
So we're over here like geeking out of it.
Dude, every time we take a sip, we're like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever
Yeah.
had. Oh my god, it's so good. And the other one's like, it tastes weird for an IPA. Let's see. The Black Spot.
Black Spot was awesome, and that didn't do.
I love that beer.
We went over to the joint across the street, Osprey Tavern, and after their oyster night, we got a bunch of oyster shucks, and
Thank you.
we passed it by.
Thank you.
And did an oyster black lager, and it was amazing. It was
And
good
we did
beer.
it like a little untraditionally too. So like when we already had the black lager done fermented in the tank. We were gonna like transfer it in the bright tank the next day, and so we literally went over there, worked it out. We got the shells, and then we added it in the bright tank and just researched it from there. It was cool.
Yeah.
So who ate the oysters to get off the shelves?
Whoever was paying
Whoever
like
was
$2
paying
an oyster over there,
$2
man. I cleaned a lot of meat out of them though.
So the next time I go over there, I'm supposed to lick every shell first.
Sure, I'm gonna boil it anyway. It's fine.
That was just another situation of it was a slow mover. So after that, after those couple romantic brews, we realized, wow, we're really not in control of a lot of these beers because.
What's funny
consumer
too
market's
is
like-
not in like a conceited way. We got a lot of recognition for beers like that. Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
take that or take like Royal Wheat. Like that was one of the slowest movers we had. Like we meddled with it internationally and it was great. We're very excited about that. But it was one of the slowest things we've ever done and we can't make it again because no one wants to drink it that fast. Or like the Black Lager, we had a lot of attention through, what was that one? Like Suds and Duds?
Yeah, that and just different.
Yeah, like
media outlets.
Yeah, people wrote a lot of articles about it. But, again, people
It's
saw oysters on the menu and they're like,
Yeah.
so.
right after work. That's all.
Yeah, man. I saw one more. We good?
So I think a question on a lot of people's minds is, what are you hiding behind that wall when you exit?
He was just working back there earlier.
Yeah,
so.
we allow the staff to go eat and stuff while they're working.
Yeah. But just to give you an idea, so back there's the keg washer. Does exactly what it says. Not really anything fascinating about it. It's the same one that they have over at Rock Pit, actually. So we've also got a small lab over there. And by lab, I mean a toolbox with a microscope on it. And then our walk-in cooler's back there too. So. What's up?
No Walter White stuff going on back there in your lab.
Oh, I'll tell you that.
So the kids might have left on the ground.
Yeah, so for our walk-in, we actually use a long draw system. You guys are pretty familiar with what that is? If you're not, so you've got two different types of draft systems usually. It's a direct draw, which is where it's coming from the keg to the actual point of the faucet, right?
So
It's
like
all...
so like in your Keizer.
Yeah, like a kegerator or something like that. It's all cooled within that tower. They're self-contained. If you didn't notice, our towers are actually in the middle of the bar. There's no way we could fit 13.5 barrels underneath that tiny little cabinet. So we've got what's called a trunk line, and it's about a 4 or 5 inch line that has a bunch of different beer lines inside of it that runs from underneath that tower all the way into the walk-in cooler. And it has glycol lines within the inside of it too, so it keeps it pre-programmed to a specific temperature, the entire draw on it. So, kind of really helped us get that kind of open feel, square bar kind of thing. We weren't locked into having to drill holes into the walk-in cooler and put some drywall up on it. So,
Is getting your tank line to for proper serving, not glycol and stuff, is that a pain in the ass?
No, because
So you
again,
actually use a company that does.
it's all science. Right. This temperature at this length, at this amount of resistance will work this
If you
way.
have too short a hose or too big a diameter hose, you're going to get pumped.
Sure. Yeah.
With your long draw system, I mean, you guys must have some immaculate beer line cleaning regimen and management. Do you hire a company to come in and do that for y'all, or is this something you guys do on your own?
Have you met Austin?
Yeah, yeah, we got a treatment keg that we fill with caustic and acid and all that kind of stuff, and obviously not at the same time, we'd all die. But so he does a great job keeping up with every 2 weeks he cleans the lines out. Every month and a half he'll acid them out too. There are companies out there, if you're looking for those things like Tap Tech, those kind of things that'll do that for you. But again, it's at your expense, and then obviously they don't exactly take the same pride in your product or those kind of things that you would.
So we need to hire an Austin.
Yeah, you want them?
No.
No, but he might need to start a business so he can go there too.
So what's really cool too, and the one thing that I found out in Chicago, it's actually a state law that if you have draft lines, you have to have them cleaned every 2 weeks, and you have to have a log of it saying that you've had them cleaned every 2 weeks. I don't know how that actually happened, but the fact that they have a law saying and upholding standards for draft cleaning is awesome.
Yeah.
So.
I gotta imagine with your trunk going underneath the ground and everything, you have no way to visibly inspect your lines other than at the end it's inside.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Run it under a panel, just make it fruitless.
What's up?
What if I'm not rougher?
We'll find out the hard way. It's got about 2 feet to fill before we see it.
It'll start flowing down to the floor here or back there once.
Yep. It'll come out of either entry or exits for sure. So. Anything else? Did we answer all the questions?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Cool.
That's good.
Let's get a fucking beer.
Thank you guys.
No, thank you guys very much for coming out and all the questions and stuff. I'll be hanging out for a little bit. Doug, I don't know what you're doing. But, if you guys have any questions that you want to keep throwing at us, let us know.